Welcome to the Myofascial Health podcast hosted by me, Unu. Follow along as I explore the depths of John Barnes' myofascial release approach on my road to mastery. Along the way, I'll be sharing the lessons I learn as I open my myofascial release practice in Austin, Texas, so that you don't have to make the same mistakes I do. Welcome back to the Myofascial Health Podcast. Now, I'm joined here by a very special guest. She's been a PTA, a physical therapist assistant, for over 10 years. She's been an MFR therapist for about a year and a half. She works mostly with military clinics. It's my honor to introduce Christina Dinh. Thank you so much for joining me on this podcast.
Thank you, for having me.
Of course. Now, we met at Healing Seminar not too long ago. And Healing Seminar is one of those seminars that is made for therapists and non-therapists. So you don't have to have a license to put your hands on people. I went with my now wife, Yvette, and she's an engineer, and it is very cool to partake in the Healing Seminar. Now, for you, Christina, I know that your first ever MFR seminar was Healing Seminar, and it sounds like you got to take it again where we met. Can you share about your experience on what it was for you the first time and maybe how that compares to the second time, or any insights on that?
Sure. The first time, it was kind of on a whim. I had a friend on the East Coast, and she, we met at like a seminar on the East Coast, one of those personal growth seminars. But it was kind of on a whim. We kind of loosely kept in contact. But she's like, "Oh yeah, I heard of John Barnes, and I'm interested in going to this healing seminar." So I was like, "Oh yeah, John Barnes, I've heard of him." So we just kind of went on a whim, and it turned out to be John Barnes was there. He was teaching, and it was quite the experience, transformative, I would say.
And what was your first impression of John? Because it sounds like you didn't really know who he was, and your friend was like, "Hey, let's take this John Barnes seminar." Were you just like gung ho, or did you have any reservations about it?
I came in with a pretty open mind, but I remember the first experience seeing people unwind on the table on the stage. That was quite new to me because I've never seen that before. People making these dramatic movements and basically unwinding. My colleague and friend, actually, she thought they were actors or actresses or plants until she got up on the table herself and started unwinding. So it was really quite the experience.
And I remember the first time I saw someone unwind on stage. And for anyone who's new to myofascial release, unwinding is an involuntary movement. It just happens if you allow it. It's like a spontaneous urge to move in a certain direction, but it's not you consciously moving a body part. So there's definitely a look to it. And I totally agree. I think the first time I saw that, I thought it was the most bizarre thing. I think I remember thinking, it looks like someone's having an exorcism on stage, you know? And I was definitely, there's a lot of friction for me, but I was open to it. And yes, I think you have all those Channel 5 thoughts of like, is this a planted person? This must be an
Are they an
actor.
actor and actress?
You got it until
Yeah.
you feel it. And so until that happens, you kind of question things. Now, just as a reminder, unwinding is very unique to the person that is unwinding. And so sometimes when you see someone on stage, it will be kind of a bigger, violent unwinding, and that's part of it. But some of the more subtle unwindings that aren't even noticeable by our eyes can be also equally, if not more, impactful. So don't get caught up in the way that it looks, but recognizing, hey, you're just facilitating their natural healing process.
That's true.
Now, you retook this.
Yeah.
So, what was your experience the second time around?
Well, I've actually taken it 3 times. This is my third time taking it.
Oh, wow. Okay. So, yeah. So, what changes do you notice after repeating this particular seminar?
Well, first of all, it's a different seminar every time because it's a different group of people, it's a different atmosphere and environment you're working with. Usually, it's never the same river twice, yes? It's never the same moment twice. So I really it's my favorite seminar and I think it's because you get people from all over, not just therapists, but patients, people that are curious, people from all walks of life. And I actually enjoy the seminar more than the ones for the therapists.
Interesting. I would not disagree with that. I think it definitely carries a different energy, and I do appreciate when it's someone who isn't in this particular world, but you see some people have like a knack for it. They just pick it up very clearly because I don't think they have the clutter that maybe some of us, like myself, who I come from a physical therapy background, where I say, hey, these are the holds or this is what I was taught, and you don't have that. So you kind of just do the technique without the chatter. Would you
Mhm.
agree or disagree with that?
I would agree because when you get someone that doesn't have that medical baggage, so to speak, you have someone with an open mind that's willing to learn, that's curious, and then just goes with it. And it's just really refreshing.
Absolutely. Now, when you took your first seminars, did you immediately start using the work or did it take you some time to grasp onto it?
I used it intermittently. And the reason why is because I've taken other myofascial release seminars from a different company or person, and their holds are not as long. I took
Hmm.
a myofascial release from another company, like I said, and the holds were for 90 seconds. So John Barnes MFR is very different from anything I've ever, any continuing education classes I've ever taken.
And can you elaborate on that? I've only taken John Barnes seminars. And so for me, it's like, yeah, once you experience the real thing, why would you go to anything else? So I don't
Right.
have that reference point. So for you, though, what were the differences in terms of, I guess, if there was a difference in science or techniques you had mentioned or the experience?
Well, it was definitely, I took this other myofascial release course before I took the John Barnes course. So it was definitely more clinical. The holds were only for 90 seconds. They were a lot shorter and it didn't have that kind of like mind body element that John talks about, that kind of emotional component to the physical component. Yes.
That's awesome. For anyone who's wondering, I think that's a vote of, hey, stick to the John Barnes stuff. That is very different. Something that makes John Barnes myofascial release unique are the sustained holds. So somewhere between the 3 to 5 minute mark, interleukins get released from piezoelectricity, and that's your body's natural anti-inflammatories. And it needs to be held for at least that long, if not longer. The deeper and longer you hold the releases, different restrictions under the layers can get released. And so that's one distinct thing that makes John's myofascial release different than others. Now, did you witness any unwindings in the other class?
You know, I think I worked with you this past healing seminar, and I told you I don't really unwind, but I did experience the skill enhancement seminar where I did do some unwinding. It's a moment where I actually cried, and I haven't cried in a long time, but it was definitely a different experience to feel that movement because usually I don't unwind in that way in movements and dramatic gestures or anything like that.
And what do you feel like keeps you from entering that space more
Hmm.
freely?
Well, I think I mentioned to you when I saw you at the, like I said, the last seminar, but it's like I feel the energy moving, but it's like a trickle. And
Mhm.
there's like this damn blockage that's so thick that like the energy just like trickles out, break out. But it's not something that you can force.
So I completely agree with that. And the reason I ask is I think there's a lot of people who have a tough time unwinding. And I'm sure there's different reasons, but I know one of the reasons is a fear of letting go of control. And so because you're gonna have to trust and be vulnerable, and that's part of the healing process. And
Mm,
for me, I've been able to witness my wife Yvette be able to have her own unwindings. And she was very rigid in her first healing seminar. So it's very cool to repeat it and see how she receives the work now. And, I think I remember during the very first seminar that I took her to, this healing seminar, she saw someone unwind on stage for the first time and got freaked out. She was like, "Give me the keys, at it," you know? And I had to meet her where she was at. So I said, "Here are the keys. If you want to leave, I'm not going to stop you. But this is what I do, and I would love for you to stay and just be a part of this." To
Mhm.
now, when she sees someone unwind, she knows it because she's felt it, and it's taken some time for her to get there. But I'm so grateful that she was willing and able to let go. And so I think
Mhm.
everyone has these dams that they, I think, put there themselves because it's safe. It's what they know.
Yeah, they're kind of psychological protective mechanisms, yes?
You got it. You got it. And something that John says is the ultimate form of control is being able to let go of control.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, and I think it just goes to that because at least for me in life, let's say myofascial release, and I have a practice based out of Austin, Texas. Sometimes I can get so fixated on this one way that I think it should be done that it closes off all the possibilities of anything else that's trying to help. And so
Mhm.
once I get out of my own way, all of these different avenues will open up, and I'll be like, oh my gosh, this was so much easier than me forcing it and saying, hey, this has to be it. This has to be it. And me justifying, hey, this has to be it because of X, Y, and Z versus just being still. And sometimes what I'll do is I'll walk out in nature. And I know you're in Hawaii, so I'm sure there's a bunch of nature, but I will just walk out in nature so I'm not thinking about it. And then somehow when I'm out of my head and more in channel three, then
Mhm.
these answers will flow through me as opposed to me trying to figure it out. Now, just as a reminder, John talks about two different channels, channel five and channel three. Channel five can be thought of like your left brain. It's more linear, logical, rational. This is where fear is thought to be. Versus your right brain, yes, versus your right brain is more creative, intuitive, abstract. This is where love is thought to be. And John challenges us to be more in channel three. He's not saying to disregard channel five, but he says, hey, if you operate from channel three, your channel five senses will become better. Versus, I think when I find myself having the opposite order, where I'll be in channel five, my channel three definitely suffers because my intuitive voice is a lot softer than my fearful voice, which is loud. Do you have a feeling or sense of you being in channel five versus channel three?
Oh boy, that's a good question. At work, I'm definitely in Channel 5 because I have to be. It's a Channel 5 clinic, and most PT clinics are. You have to meet a certain productivity, you have to document in a certain way, and you only have so much time to do the modalities, the exercises, the manual treatment. So I'm definitely in Channel 5 at work. But when I'm at home, I try to being more present. And I do try to incorporate that at work, but I'm definitely it's a Channel 5 world, you know?
I do know, and I'll just say that whenever you catch yourself, or whenever I catch myself saying, I have to do this, or I'm supposed to do it this way, I'm in the wrong channel, right? And so when I hear you say, I have to be channel five at work, I would question that. Now, I do know that when you're in a traditional setting, then yes, everything is measured by productivity, and you have to
Yeah.
take documentation time home because you're with patients and you're seeing multiple patients an hour.
Yeah.
And I have now seen a different path and I'm living it out. So that's the way I used to think, being like, oh my gosh, everybody else is doing this exact thing. It seems like everybody else is miserable. But when I ask them, they just say, yeah, this is what being a PT is like, you
Mm.
know? And so, luckily, I've come across different physical therapists, myofascial release therapists, where they challenge that notion and they say, does it have to be that way? Now, if you're choosing it because you have other drivers or motivations, and maybe you find a different sense of purpose in that, then that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with doing that. But if you find yourself feeling like you're burnt out and you're just having to suffer in silence because you see everybody else doing it, so that's the status quo, that because you're in myofascial release, it gives you an opportunity to at least feel through that differently.
Mm.
Now, for you, I remember in the healing seminar that we both attended, John asked you specifically, what's stopping you from starting your own myofascial release practice in Hawaii?
And
What?
I said, Channel 5.
Okay, okay. And so I guess what is it that what parts of Channel 5 are stopping you?
That's a great question. Maybe it is fear. Maybe it is performance anxiety. Maybe it's probably fear of the unknown, not knowing what's going to happen. But like he said, he did say start small. So maybe
Hmm.
like, that financial responsibility of not totally leaving your full-time your day job, so to speak, but maybe just picking up 1 to 2 patients or on the side as a side hustle. I think that would be the way for me to go.
Does that feel good to you?
I think so. I feel so.
Perfect. That's what I was hoping you would say. So, yes, I think sometimes when people think about starting their own myofascial release businesses and practices, they think it's like you have to go all in, you know?
Mhm.
And that works for some people. And there's definitely a step where when you are able to go full time into your MFR practice, that obviously the energy around that is more plentiful. So you are able to build it out more. But
Mhm.
with where you're at, Christina, I know that a ton of people are there. And I was there
Mhm.
at one point in my life. And there's nothing admirable about quitting your job and starting something completely new, especially when you have these fears around it, and like causing family members to suffer, you know? So like
Right.
I would not recommend that, and I don't want anyone to think like that is the only way to start your MFR practice. Whereas what feels better to you is like, what if I just started seeing a couple of clients on the side?
Mhm.
Right? And then showing, hey, that's going to build your confidence. You're going to get more practice. And then hopefully they'll have the results that I know deep down you're capable of giving to them. Now, there's one thing in me saying that, and another thing in you believing that and feeling that. So I would
Mhm.
just agree with what John has said. And I know there's many practitioners who have done the same thing where it just starts as a side hustle and then it'll slowly build. And then you get to that point where you say, okay, is my side hustle making enough to where I could leave my job and go all in on that, right? And so I don't want anyone to think that it's this huge step. It's all or nothing. It's like as long as you're willing and able, and don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean it's easy by any stretch of the imagination because you still have a full-time job. There's still pressures on that front. But if you start carving just that little piece on the side, just seeing where that goes, you know? So I would say at least that is comforting for me to hear because I think it's also my role to help nudge you in that direction. Because I'll be
Mhm.
honest, I don't hear John ask somebody in the audience that very question. And so I think sometimes he will nudge us in the directions that we're supposed to be. I said supposed, but he nudges us in a direction that he knows will be beneficial to us. And it's
Uh,
whether or not we have the courage to step through that door.
I didn't realize that. I just assume we ask everyone those questions, you know?
No, that's the wild thing. He does it. And so just know that he probably senses something. And I've been blessed for John to sense something that I didn't see in myself. And so I think I'm just passing the torch because one, I got to work with you, and two, I think I get a sense of the type of person you are. And I would much rather work with someone who is a little bit more timid and maybe had the background and experience than someone who was super cocky, felt like they know it, and then in reality, they're far from it, you know? So I think you're in a good place, but I think sometimes it doesn't feel like that. Is that fair to say?
That is on the dot, hit the nail. Kind of like, yeah, kind of everything is up in the air, transitional, unsatisfied,
Unsatisfied?
current job. And yes, that hits it on the nail.
Okay. And I think sometimes fears are bigger than what we think that they are. And so I think something that I've done to overcome some of my fears is I'll journal, right? And I'll just say, what's the worst thing that could happen? What's my most fearful thing? So go ahead, tell us your biggest fear with starting your own MFR practice.
It would be a total failure, which is actually that's not, which actually I'm fine with. Actually, it's not the failing. I think it's a step by step process. I just have to take one step in front of the other at a time. The first step would, because I work as a PTA, I would have to get my massage therapy license or certification, and then go from there. And then I think the process would be something like I just rent a massage table or buy a massage table, put it in the trunk of my car, and just go do home visits. That'll be like the starting point. I feel.
Yo,
Yeah.
I'm totally for that. I started and had the same fears, like, what if this doesn't work out? And I would let my Channel 5 voice
Yep.
be very loud, And I remember reading statistics, something along the lines of 90% of businesses fail. So who was I to say that my business would be in that 10%? And this is all you justifying things with numbers. And that is the wrong place to be. But those fears are valid. So for me, because I didn't know anything about business, I didn't know if this was going to work or not. I made a point to keep the lowest overhead I could until I could prove that this was something that was workable. And so I would drive around Austin, had a table in my car set up and do all that. And it's cool to reflect back on that, because I just remember listening to podcasts and enjoying that
Mm-hmm.
ride and those kinds of things. Sometimes in the summer it was really hot, so that wasn't super enjoyable. But it was kind of my humble beginnings, and I think I hear that from a lot of more established myofascial release practitioners who will also say, like, yeah, I started by just driving around and doing home visits. You build up enough clientele and you get to a point for me where I was like, I don't want to drive around anymore. And so let me see if
Mm.
people would come to me. And I had built up enough clients for them to find me or keep seeing me. And so I ultimately started small. And then I started sharing a room with somebody. So I only rented the room out for 2 days out of the week. And then now I'm at a place where I rent a room for the whole week and, I rent the space. And then it keeps growing from there. So I think what I'm hearing from you is yes, you're right on target in terms of just take one step at a time. And all you have to worry about is that one step in front of you. Because if you are looking to climb a mountain and you're at the very bottom and you're looking at the sheer magnitude of it, it can get overwhelming. You're going to be like, yo, I have to do that. I got to do all of this versus every journey starts with one step. And then as you stack these steps together, you're going to come to a place when you look back and you're like, man, I actually made it pretty far, and it still goes. And so I just want you to know that like with where you're at, it's normal to feel and fear these things that you pop up into your head. that are unrealized, but also recognizing that's channel five, and that's not
Yeah,
where you want to be. Whereas ultimately, what led me to take that leap was saying, I am unhappy at my job and I am getting burnt out. I cannot see myself doing this for the next 30 years.
exactly.
So for me, I was like, it's worth it for me to take this risk and see where it goes because at the very least, I'll have known that I've taken that chance. And then my biggest fear of failing, of being like, if I fail, I could just find another job and be exactly in this miserable position that I'm at. So there's no risk, right? Like you have everything to gain and nothing to lose because you can always find a job that you don't like, you know?
That's true.
So that's what allowed me to take that leap of being like, yeah, I would regret it. I remember, at least for me, when I was working home health and I started driving to the elderly population's houses and living spaces, I would ask them, like, what are your biggest regrets? And I think if anyone has that opportunity to talk to the older people and just hear what they feel about life versus the person that I was in that moment, you see what matters in life. And they always regretted not doing things. They never said, man, I regret not making more money or not working
Mm,
more or not doing these things that we convince ourselves in this moment are so important for whatever reason. But when you are at the end of life or nearing it to where you can see it, you realize like the most important things are, hey, was I able to be myself? Was I able to
mm,
spend time with family? Or was I too busy and fearful of judgment that I wore this mask that was draining on me, you know? And so that is ultimately what allowed me to take those steps. And I hope that that resonates with you and maybe other listeners who are embarking on the same journey or contemplating it and just having these fears. I just want everyone to know that it's normal to have those. And yes, it makes it more rewarding for you to step through that. Now, I think for you, you had an extra step that I haven't. You're saying, hey, I would have to get my massage therapy license.
mhm.
And I'm not exactly sure about those details, but if you feel called to do that, then that becomes that next step. I just want to make sure, and I don't think you're doing this, but I think I see this sometimes where a lot of people will just start saying, I need more certifications or I need more
Uh,
seminars. And what really you need is just to know enough to help someone who asks for your help. And
mm,
so I say that because, I was like that at one point in my life where I was like, oh, I need to get these certifications to show that I was, I don't know, some important person that I knew what I was talking about. But with myofascial release, it's a feel to it. It's like an art, And so it's like you can't get more certifications to learn how to paint, like essentially
right,
you just got to
right.
paint.
You just got to do it.
You got to do it. And then you get better because you're going to have experience in all these things. But it's not about making your false ego, which is channel five, more inflated, meaning titles or letters behind my name or whatever. And the only thing that people are looking for is someone who can guide them and has had experience with the injuries or pains that they're struggling with. And if you got
Mm,
that and you can help them, that's all you need because that's what it's about. It's about that patient care. So I just want to make sure that when you're doing this, I think for you, you're just saying, hey, I just want to be able to work under myself. I'm a
right,
PTA. I need a PT to sign off on notes.
right.
But I'd also be curious, and I don't know enough about this, if you just opened up a wellness thing because you're already PTA, would you be required to get that massage therapy license? I wouldn't know that.
That's a good question. I don't know. I would have to do some research on it.
Yeah. So after what we've said, how do you feel about starting your thing.
Well, first of all, thank you for your encouragement. I really appreciate the community and the nudging here. But I'm definitely going in that direction. It's just baby steps by baby steps. It will happen. I just gotta put one foot right in front of the other and just do it.
There we go. I love to hear that. Okay. This is going to be recorded and posted. So the next time I see you at a seminar, if you haven't taken those baby steps, I'm gonna be like, what happened? What happened to the Christina that I spoke to on the podcast? But I love
You're
that.
holding me to it.
Okay. And another thing I wanted to mention is progress is progress. So as long as you're going in that direction, sometimes you'll take big steps, sometimes you'll take baby steps, sometimes you might not even take a step for that day. And just to extend yourself grace and be patient with the process. So it's just making sure that you don't quit, because that I think is the failure, is if you quit.
Mm,
But if you keep going at it, something will happen. Where your focus goes, energy flows. And so I
mm,
would just hate for you to get discouraged and then quit, and then your energy is at this less than fulfilling job. Now,
right.
that's one avenue, and I think that's an avenue that a lot of MFR therapists will take. But it's not uncommon for me to hear that MFR therapists will work for other MFR therapists as well. So
Ah.
just making sure you explore all the different avenues. I'm not sure about the MFR community in Hawaii. Would you happen to know more about that?
I don't actually. I know there's a senior student on Kauai, I believe, and there's some therapists on Maui, but I don't know if like a study group in Hawaii or anything like that. I think I saw some posts on the MFR Insight group where there was a physical therapist that took some courses. So I think I'll have to network with them and get in touch with them and see if they want to form like a study group or something like that.
Yeah, I think study groups are great, especially in the early stages of anyone's MFR journey. Just being able to be around other therapists, learn from more seasoned therapists who can fine tune your touch and maybe the way that you perform it. And hopefully they conduct it in a way that's authentic to John's teachings. Early on in my journey, I went to San Antonio. I'm in Austin, but I drove to San Antonio because Diane Hargroder was hosting San Antonio study groups. And I learned from her. She's a phenomenal therapist, and she has a great team of therapists in San Antonio. So if anyone's curious or needs help in that area, Hargroder PT is 100% authentic to John's work, and I have nothing but high regards to say about Diane. But she allowed me to grow and learn subtle things, or fine tune the way I approach things, and made sure I kept checking in with myself. And so I just want to say thank you to her, and for anyone who has a study group opportunity, I would definitely go if you have the ability. Now, I've never been to Hawaii, so I don't know about the different islands. I don't know how easy it is to hop between the islands. But I do know that Kauai is one of the other big vortexes in the world. Did you know
Oh,
that?
I did not know that.
Yeah, so the reason why Sedona happens to be what it is, like this magical place, is because of the canyons that surround Sedona. There's a heightened sense of energy. And I think if the world had acupuncture points, Sedona would be one of them.
Wow.
Kauai is another one. So I think
Wow.
there's a lot of energy that kind of vortexes or swirls in that area. Machu Picchu in Peru, I think that's another one.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
I think if I ever had the opportunity to go to Hawaii, I would love to go to Kauai.
Yes, come.
Okay, I'm gonna take you up on that. I'm gonna take you up on that. I'll stop by your MFR practice. How does that sound?
Okay.
No pressure. No pressure. I'm just
Right.
nudging, just making sure we're on the same page, getting you to go into that direction. Now, I think something that you shared with at least me and the group that we were a part of when we were working together is you have high anxiety.
Yes, I do.
And How long have you felt this way?
I've had it for over 10 years. I actually take medicine for anxiety, which helps. And one of the questions I did ask John was, a lot of people come to MFR with physical pains due to surgeries or injuries or chronic problems. The question I asked him was, does MFR help with like mental pains or like, mental, like the question I think it was with bipolar disorder or schizophrenia or clinical depression or anxiety disorders, things like that. And so he talks about the mind body connection. So when there's blockages, like fascial blockages, from my understanding, myofascial release helps remove those blockages. And so my question was, and I'll have to ask him again to clarify, but if they're like mental pains or mental blockages, would MFR help that because it kind of translates to a, a physical element to it.
And without having to ask him right now in this moment, what do you feel the answer to that question is?
I would say definitely yes, it would help because he always talks about that mind body connection and how, you know, examples are like if we have a feeling in our gut or we have tightness in our shoulders because we have a lot of stress. So that kind of like mental emotional energy translates into like possibly physical tightness or imbalances or blockages. So yeah, I feel that it would help, which is why again I am interested in MFR for personal reasons too.
Yes, I think that a lot of people come to MFR to try to solve their own pains or injuries. And I just wanted to let you know or ask you because I think we want that certainty of an answer, whether it's in
Mm.
business or life or anything. But I just asked you, and you said definitely yes. Okay. And I'm pretty sure that if you asked John, he would feel the same way because anything that's tied to the fascial system can improve with myofascial release. And so that's everything under the skin. Plus we address energetic components, emotional components. So it is the full being of the human being.
Mm.
Now, with anxiety, I think for me, especially once I started my business, there were elements of anxiety. And that's because of the unknown. And you just want to make sure you're doing the right things or that it's going to work out. But when you are not having those things, then for me, I would get stuck in my head and I just wouldn't be the best version of myself. And what I've come to learn is anxiety is being fearful of the future and specifically of what is gonna go wrong, what could go wrong, right?
Everything.
Exactly. Versus there's that softer voice that's not as loud that could ask the exact same question, but for some reason we don't listen to it. And that voice is saying, what could go right?
Mm.
And I think that for me, allowing me to at least play both sides instead of just focusing on the negative, which I think is human nature, to just be like, what could go right? Because I'm already expecting these bad things. And just to say, like, when they happen, I should have known versus being like, what if I just detach from the outcome and I don't fear the future and I say to myself in this present moment, what could go right? And then what you notice is, at least for me, when I'm in the exact present moment, I'm not worried about the future. And then when
Mm.
when life happens, things will just unfold, and they'll unfold in ways better than I could have possibly imagined when I started.
See, there you have to have an element of trust, you know?
Yeah.
I call it sometimes people call it faith, which I'm working on that, but I don't have too much of that usually.
And is that because you've had experiences in your past where you didn't trust yourself and things ended horribly?
Yeah, I think that's a huge like theme, kind of learning to trust yourself.
Hmm.
Even if you do make mistakes, if you do fall, even if things don't go right, but just learn to trust yourself and learn from your mistakes or whatever happens.
And that's a channel three mindset. So I love that versus the channel five of being like, what could go wrong? It's,
Mhm.
hey, it's just accepting that, hey, it's a learning experience.
Mhm.
And failure is not failure as long as you learn something from it so that you don't do it again, right?
Yeah.
And for me, and I don't know if you share this, but growing up in an Asian family,
Mhm.
academia was held in the highest regard. And
Yeah.
so failure was taken very heavily,
Yeah.
and failure for Asians was a B, so it's like
Right.
you're like expected to be almost perfect. And I think that that sets up an environment where if you fail, you don't understand how to process it, at least for me.
Mm.
And so for me, especially when I started my own business, it's when things don't work out and are quote unquote a failure, it's just, hey, it didn't work this time. What did I learn from those experiences and what am I going to change so that when I do it again, I don't make those same mistakes. And then you rinse and repeat enough to where you work out all the kinks and then you have a proven product. And then that's where the successful myofascial release business comes into play. Now,
Right.
with you, is that a similar background?
Yes, definitely. Coming from, an Asian family, my parents immigrated after the war, the Vietnam War, and just, grades were in school and academics were everything. So yeah, it could be a part of that, like not wanting to get less than an A, and like you said, D is like failure.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I've had to challenge my belief system on because it was that, like 90% is the bare minimum I need to make to quote unquote be successful. Whereas in business, that perfectionism mentality will work against you.
Right.
And something that I've learned from a previous coach is like 80% is good enough. And so it's like such a difference, but it's so true because I think sometimes, at least for me, I would get caught up in this perfectionism and I'm like, it's got to be perfect. And I can't send it out or send the email or post the social media thing unless it's perfect. And what I realized is, it just needs to get out there. And
Right.
nobody cares about the small mistakes because you're the only one that sees them. Nobody else really sees them. And even if they do see them, it's not going to be such a big mistake that they're going to call you out on. I can't believe you used the wrong there or something like it's like it's these big fears that we put these pressures on ourselves that once you let go of that, and usually that stems from something in childhood, that you're able to be your authentic self. And I think something that John says that I always try to echo is the inner journey isn't the most important journey, it's the only journey. And
Mm.
so it's so great because I'm working with patients now who are only now comfortable enough to become their authentic selves, but they're much older. I think the particular woman that I'm thinking of is 55, versus, hey, if we just allowed ourselves the grace to be ourselves, things would just move way more easily, like, and so, but it's tough to do that because, at least for me, it was like, I had my dad immigrated from Vietnam, from the Vietnam War, and,
all
what's up?
all the conditioning that we get from society, from school, from peers, from parents, all that, like, yeah, conditioning.
You got it. And it's almost like a trance. And John will call this conditioning as well. And so I think when we're in myofascial release, and I'm sure that there's other avenues to get to this place as well, but it's about shedding these belief systems that were projected onto us that we just accepted. And
Right.
so I think it's a wonderful place to be. And looking back, thinking back about my journey and when I started my own practice and even John encouraging me like he's encouraged you. And I hope that that voice you give more importance to because I know that it can be hard. Because I know that, especially for you, you're working in a military clinic, like there's a certain way to do things and there's expectations, you know? And and there's also nothing wrong with not starting your business. So like there's no pressure. It's just choosing which path you want for yourself. And so if it's not meant for you, if you're like doing the business stuff is not my cup of tea, then at least you know that. But just making sure you're doing it for the right reasons, and those reasons are based on love and not based on fear, because I
Mm.
think that distinction is how you move through life. And obviously, the fearful voice is much louder. Now, I don't want to make this be about, hey, if you're a myofascial release therapist, you have to start your own practice because if you don't, then you're nothing. Like that's not the place I want to be. And what I'm trying to say is, no matter what situation you're at, you have the power to choose what you feel like is what's going to be the best for you.
Mm.
And there's nothing wrong with being in a practice like yourself, like you're in a military clinic, and if you get different purpose and things that fill you up with that, there's nothing wrong with that. And so just making sure that, hey, even for me, it's like, oh, I'm doing this. I don't say it because, oh, well, Unu said this, so I should do it. It should be like, I feel called to do this. I want to do this for me. I'll take that step.
Well, I definitely feel that working where I currently work with service members, active duty members, that it's a population that really needs my John Barnes myofascial release. And I feel like that's part of the reason why I'm still in this position. I think John Barnes did a podcast, I think it's called Behind the Warrior, with EOD personnel, and that those personnel I believe work with explosive ordinances or basically bombs. So you can imagine the traumatic injuries from, say, the Iraq or Afghanistan war, the amputations. And, John Barnes talks about PTSD, and basically it's like a word for something that's like really, really awful. But yes, it's definitely a population that I'm interested in incorporating myofascial release too.
I love that. Now, I also know that you've done some work with the Wounded Warriors. Can you share some of your experiences on that front?
Sure. I was at Walter Reed from, I believe it was 2011 to 2014 in the outpatient amputee clinic. And a lot of the service members had traumatic injuries such as amputations. They were coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. And it was definitely a privilege to serve those who served in the Afghanistan Iraq war. I didn't know myofascial release at that time, so I used the modalities that we knew, like strengthening, soft tissue work, things like that. But definitely, it's you learn life lessons, like you say. Every day above ground is a blessing. Really, that's probably the key takeaway that I took from that experience. Yes.
I love that. And, thanks to all of our service members, I think that's something we take for granted. I know my brother is in the Navy, and so thank you. I always thank him for his service and his contributions to allow us to have these freedoms that we have living here in America. Now, and then yes, I think when you work with that specific population, where for them they confront death on the front lines, that you realize just being alive is such a gift and a blessing.
Yeah.
And I think it's always a good reminder because I think sometimes when we get caught in the day to day and we say, "Oh, I got to do this and all this stuff," it feels like a drag, but just being alive is such a blessing.
Yes.
So, thank you for sharing that. Now, before we get out of here, is there anything like that you would like to share with my audience?
I would say maybe it's worth it to fly to Sedona and take a myofascial release course with John Barnes himself teaching the course. His senior students are excellent, and I'm no doubt they're excellent, but having John Barnes there, it's really a treat. So I would encourage everyone to make that trip to Sedona, and going to Sedona is magnificent. And like I said, it's a real treat to have John Barnes himself teach. So it's definitely worth the trip.
Can you elaborate on that? Like, what makes it a treat based on the different seminars that you've taken?
Well, I took my first seminar with John Barnes in 2023, but I have to regress a little bit. I took a seminar, it was John Barnes seminar, but it was in 2012. But I mean, the instructors were excellent, no doubt. But at the time, I guess maybe it's because I was in such the clinic that I was working in at that time, there was no way I could integrate it. It could be the timing, I don't know, but the when I took the healing seminar with John Barnes in 2023, he has such a presence about him. And like I said, I'm sure a lot of people know he has over half a century of experience doing this. So it's really worth it to go take it from the sensei or master himself. It really is a treat.
So I
Yeah.
would agree with that. And for me, I will almost exclusively only take John Barnes seminars. Like when he was teaching the vacation series, he used to travel across the country. Now he only teaches those vacation series in Sedona. And I would agree. There's something about when he teaches that I think he spends some time filling the room up with his energy, but
Mm-hmm.
you can feel it. It's very
His
subtle,
presence.
but it's there. And it is his presence and how he carries himself. And I do like the way that he uses humor to keep the class lively.
Mm-hmm.
So I would agree with that. If anyone has the opportunity to take a class or seminar from John himself, I would highly encourage that. But there's nothing wrong with taking seminars, let's say, that are closer to you, you know?
Yeah,
But
I'm sure Donna is wonderful, and all the senior students are fantastic as well.
yes, everyone is great. I'm sure that they're chosen to facilitate those roles because they are well qualified. But when you have the opportunity to learn from the originator of myofascial release himself, I would take that opportunity. So I definitely agree with that. Now, if someone is in Hawaii and they want to work with you, how would they find you?
I don't know. Because, like I said, I work with only military active duty personnel for now. I think once I get my licensed massage certificate, I can start making business cards and start setting things up. But for now, I exclusively work with active duty service members.
So that sounds good. I only asked because I remember someone posting on MFR Insight saying, "Hey, is there a therapist in Hawaii?" And you commented, and I was like, you're there, you know? And I just want to make sure that if someone's looking for you, they can find you. And maybe this is all you need to start your side business, you know, because I think what I'm hearing from you is like, oh, once I do these things, then I could start. Versus, I think that if you have someone who reaches out to you and they get a good sense about you, you get a good sense about them, you could just help them, you know? And worry about the business stuff when it's there. I know that for me, when I started, I overvalued things that were not important in the long run, and I didn't place enough value on the things that really mattered. And what I mean by that is, I spent a bunch of money on my logo because I was like, oh, this, seeing me, and I need these business cards and all this stuff. And it's like, that stuff will take care of itself. The important thing is, hey, are you able to see a client? Are you able to help them? Because once that starts, that's the business. You are your business logo. And then everything will take place if you're like, this feels good. I want to keep doing this. Then you could do that other stuff, But I would make sure that you don't stop yourself from moving forward because you feel like you have to have these other pieces in place that I don't think are absolutely necessary. So, what about an email? You got an email you could share with somebody?
Sure. It's cdin CDINH 0003 at gmail.com.
Perfect. So if anyone's in Hawaii and needs a phenomenal practitioner, myofascial release therapist, reach out to Christina, and I know that you'll get taken care of.
Thank you, Unu.
You're very welcome. So I just want to thank you for being so open and honest with us on this podcast. I look forward to seeing your journey develop, and I would love to touch base and just make sure, hey, are you still taking those baby steps, getting out of your head? I just want you to know that I've been there. Many therapists have been there, so you're not alone in this. And I know I speak for everyone when I say we're all rooting for you.
Thank you, Unu.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Myofascial Health. I help myofascial release therapists create beautiful websites for their MFR practices, even if they aren't tech savvy. If you're just starting your MFR practice, or you're an experienced MFR practice owner, learn more about how I can help at www.myofascial.health/website.